I would like to get started. First of all, let me thank you all for joining us tonight for this webinar. Tonight, I would like to spend our time together giving you an overview of one of ECF's newest programs called Vital Teams. I would like to give you an overview and discuss some of the curriculum. What I hope is at the end of our time together, perhaps you may understand that this may be something that you might find helpful for your community, your vestry, or your faith group. And that maybe you would want to learn more about the Vital Teams program and curriculum after the end of this webinar. So what I'm going to do tonight is give a very brief overview of what Vital Teams is and introduce you to this program, and then talk a little bit about some of the elements of the curriculum. So I want to welcome you again to the webinar. A couple things, if I could. If you would like to propose a question or make a comment, please do so using the chat box. Most of you at this point have had some experience with that, but the chat box is located in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. Also, if there's a need, you can also raise your hand if there's opportunity for a question, but you will find all your controls in the upper left-hand corner of your screen. With that, let me get started. The first thing I'd like to do is just give you a brief introduction to the Episcopal Church Foundation, which is where Vital Teams is engineered from. ECF is an independent relay organization. It was founded in 1949 with the vision of helping congregations of all sizes work through visioning and planning, leadership development, and assistance with financial resources for ministry. All of our programs are geared towards both lay and clergy that will help, we hope, to transform the church of the future. We like to strengthen our congregation and work with them, different communities of faith. We have many opportunities to work with you regarding stewardship and effective fundraising. And when I speak about Vital Teams, I'm talking about one of our newest innovative programs to help also in terms of leadership development and working towards the church future. So this program is being brought to you by the Episcopal Church Foundation. Let me begin with a little bit of an introduction to Vital Teams. Vital Teams is a program initiative that was started by the Episcopal Church Foundation in 2014 with the focus of helping to train lay and clergy leadership teams, working with and partnering with seminaries and leadership formations, and creating tools for identifying new leaders. The primary and central focus of Vital Teams is around this whole notion of what we call collaborative ministry and collaborative leadership. If I was to summarize collaborative leadership in one sentence, this is what you see currently on your screen. What we understand collaborative leadership to be is where clergy and laity work together, having shared responsibility and authority to accomplish a shared purpose. And for us, of course, that is God's mission and God's purpose for us in God's church. So it's really trying to move us away from a traditional clergy-centered model into a shared ministry model. And I want to speak about that in just a few minutes. But before going into that, I just want to pose this question. Why collaborative leadership? Why are we, ECF, working on this program and promoting this notion of collaborative leadership through this program we call Vital Teams? First of all, we understand it to be biblically mandated. It is the way in which we believe the ministry throughout the sacred text is calling us to, a shared ministry, both clergy and laity working together. We find that in the Old Testament. We see this notion of team ministry in the Gospels, where Jesus sends the disciples out 2 by 2. And of course, we hear this whole call from Paul throughout many of the scriptures and letters that he wrote calling us into this one baptismal ministry, this shared ministry. If you think about it, when we look at the prayer book, it is laity, priests, laity, deacons, priests, and then bishops. And it's inverted that way to let us understand that really the ordained is there to help facilitate the laity and the ministry to which they're called to. But keeping in mind, it is a shared ministry that we're speaking about here. So why collaborative leadership for laity? Let's think about that for a minute and some of the ways that we might consider some of the advantages and benefits of collaborative leadership from a laity standpoint. It is the ministry of all the baptized. We continuously talk about that, the shared ministry. How about considerations around financial sustainability of clergy? Thinking about part-time, bivocational clergy. There's real need for laity to step into that role to be a part of this shared work. The father knows best, or the mother knows best. The church has operated around this theory, if you will, for many, many years, where the clergy is the one that is responsible for visioning and mission and moving the congregation forward. Here we're asking that this is a shared work together. And only through our work together and having shared authority and accountability can we move ourselves to more healthier congregations. Let's just think about this for a minute in terms of clergy, why it's important for clergy to engage in collaborative leadership. Leadership styles is an important area, and changing this paradigm again, as I said, from clergy-centered leadership to shared leadership. Again, clergy is often called to be jack of all trades. One of the things you'll hear many clergy say jokingly is that we did not go to seminary to learn about how to do plumbing and electrical work and building projects, but to more or less to lead the organization, working hand in hand with the laity. And as I spoke about a few moments ago about part-time and no-time clergy or bivocational clergy, if we face the reality of our church moving into the 24th century, this is the real reality where we will move away more and more from clergy that are full-time. And by way of a curriculum outline for vital teams, which I'd like to go over briefly with you tonight, I just want to talk about the curriculum outline. And there are essentially three important elements to this curriculum. First, Vestries is vital teams. Second, what we consider three essential ingredients to building strong teams or strong vital teams. And I will introduce you to these concepts in just a few moments. Strong relationships, clear processes, and focusing on results. And the third element of this is to help congregations and vestries and organizing bodies to identify steps that they can move forward with in their particular context to work towards strengthening their teams. So let's start with vestry as vital teams. The role of the vestry. So when we actually present this curriculum, and I think it would be fair to state this at this point, what I'm going to introduce to you tonight is what we provide to congregations, in particular vestries, but any leadership team, is we present this curriculum typically in a day and a half, usually beginning on Friday night at about 6 o'clock and running through 9, and then a follow-on workshop on Saturday from about 9 in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So some of this information may come to you pretty fast tonight, but again, please keep in mind, I just want to give you an overview and a snapshot of what this curriculum looks like. And while I do that, I hope you will hold in mind whether or not you might think this is helpful for your congregation or your individual context. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the role of vestries, the key responsibilities, tools for vestry leaders, and discussion steps. And this would be the first element of our curriculum that we would present. Generally, on the second day, we spend a considerable amount of time talking about the role of the vestry. And what we see at ECF is vestries have four primary roles: discernment, mission and vision, selecting and identifying new leaders, and of course, management and being good steward of the resources of the congregation. We spend some time talking about this and then going through some of the understanding of what vestries are responsible for. Another area that we delve into during our time together is discussing team norms. And we take you through a complete opportunity to work through these norms among your group, talking about what those norms are, why we have norms, and how we can use these in an effective way to manage our organization and to manage our vestry teams and our groups. We do an extensive conversation around church size. This is an important conversation that we have, is helping congregations to understand the size of their congregation, how size does matter, and how it's helpful to understand where you are on the spectrum. This is an issue around capacity, an issue around how do we serve those who God called to us. And we have a good conversation around this because, believe it or not, we all want to function as program-sized congregations. But the average size congregation, as many of you may know, in our church, in the Episcopal Church now, or average Sunday attendance on a Sunday, is around 62. And we can do a lot when we understand what our context is around church size. The other area that we get into, and this of course would be initial retreat, is to talk about how important retreats are, how to plan retreats, how to talk about conflict around vestry, how to name what our values are. But the important part is using this time as holy time away from just the general business of the vestry to really working on how the vestry works as a team, and how do we get to know each other, and how do we work through some of these other areas above and beyond the normal business of a vestry or a team. We talk about some of these areas, and I'm not going to get into these tonight, but we also provide you some tools, some things to help you understand more about your context and the neighborhood in which you're working, how to really focus on this time together in preparing your strategic goals and vision for your parish. And we give you some tools to do that during the overall time and retreat, the day and a half that we spend together. I want to take the next few minutes and just give you an overview of the three essential ingredients and part of the curriculum that we would introduce in the day and a half in which we would spend with a vestry or a leadership team. Again, as I stated earlier, we believe that there are three key ingredients for strong teams, to lead strong teams. That's to work on and build on strong relationships, clear processes, and focus on results. Let's take each of those in turn. When we consider all of these together, we understand, as the picture will show you on the screen, that when any three of these elements are out of balance, then the team is not functioning well. And usually it's because of one of these three areas. And we believe that if we work and strengthen teams in these three critical areas, the team will reach balance and will be able to function at a high level. And so I'll take each one of these in order and just give you an example of what we understand needs to be. First, strong relationships. During our retreat time together, should we have an opportunity to meet with your vestry or leadership team to do a retreat around vital teams, we set aside time where the vestry can get to know each other, where the vestry and members can get to understand their roles, and to talk about the value of holding regular retreats and opportunities to get together and work on these three areas. So we spend a great deal of time in the curriculum and in our time together really working on these three areas under strong relationships. We spent some time talking about how teams form and the notion of team development. Teams move through this process. Teams come together, they form, They storm, norm, and perform. And oftentimes we go back through this loop. I want you to keep in mind that most of you each year will elect 1 or 2 or 3 or more new vestry members to your teams. It's important to know that every time one new member, just one new member joins a team, the team is a new team. And the team will inevitably begin to go through this process all over again. So we spent some time talking about this and understanding where your team might be along this phase and how we can talk about and perhaps provide some tools to move you through this process. Because ultimately, we want to move from organizing ourselves to really performing at a high level as a team. And this is an important conversation to have as well. Building strong relationships. We talked about vestry retreats. Another way in terms of building strong relationships is to start every vestry meeting or every team meeting with an opportunity to work on relationship building. We believe this to be very important in terms of team relationship. And here's why. When a vestry or a team moves to a point of potential conflict or even just disagreement, if we have strong relationships, we can usually move through that process with a level of effectiveness and a way in which we can hold people together. Okay, I'm just looking at the box, the text box for just a second as I go forward. But Brendan is helping to answer many of your questions, so thank you, Brendan. Another area we spent some time on and during our workshops and retreats together is communication styles. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few moments. I want you all to think about that are out there right now. How often do you have the opportunity or take the opportunity to start your vestry meetings or your team meetings around a regular check-in or certainly Bible study? First of all, 2 things on this, and I think it's important that I mention it here. Remember that many of our folks, our vestry members or team members, are coming from other places. Some are coming from school, some are coming from home, from taking care of children and loved ones all day. Some are coming from work. Check-ins are a good opportunity to slow everyone down, let people share a little bit about what's going on in their life before even getting into Bible study. This is an important element towards building relationships as well. Allowing people an opportunity to share, to settle in before the meeting begins or even before Bible study. And we also recommend and think it's a good idea to begin all meetings, vestry meetings and leadership team meetings with Bible study. Certainly with prayer, but with Bible study to center ourselves and to invite the Spirit into that conversation. So we talk about this and talk about some ways in which that may happen at the beginning of the vestry meeting in an effective and efficient way. As I talked about communication styles, we usually spend in any given retreat setting a good hour on talking about communication styles. And why is this important? This whole conversation is important as members around the table begin to get to know each other and understand their communication style, their individual communication style, as well as the communication style of those that are around the table. There's a lot of sharing and learning around this. And also it's important, part of our conversation is to know that we all move back and forth between these various communication styles, depending on who's in the room, who's at the table, and who's talking, and what position we are taking in a particular discussion. Let me just talk a little bit about clear processes. Each one of our segments in the curriculum, we begin with a set of questions to have the team begin to think about these areas. So when we talk about clear processes, we talk about the meeting schedule. Length of meetings is always an important conversation, and really helping folks understand that any meeting we would recommend that goes longer than 90 minutes is probably too long of a meeting. So how do we get our meetings to about 90 minutes, our vestry meetings, on a consistent basis? How do we structure ourselves? How do we organize ourselves so that we can use our time effectively and efficiently. You know, reports will show, the studies will show that one of the most difficult reasons that people are reluctant to join teams or vestries is because of the length of time. If we can work on this and get our time down to a definitive no more than 90 minutes, we could see some improvement in those that are willing to serve. We talk about some of the most life-giving parts of a vestry meeting. What parts need work? And in each of your individual contexts, the answers will be different in each context. We spend a amount of time on talking about these three critical areas. How do we run effective meetings? You know, while Robert Rules of Order are a notion that a lot of us like to follow, but it's can be a little too formal for vestry meetings, can be a little too formal for team meetings. So how do we run an effective meeting without getting bogged down in all of the rules and the regulations, but still have some structure and organization to our meetings? How do we make decisions? Consensus decision making is an area that we recommend. We spend some time talking about that and how do we move from just majority decision making to consensus decision making and why that can be helpful. And also talk about how to facilitate conversations, not just for the chair, but also for those that are involved in the meeting and around that. One of the big areas around running effective meetings, and we talk about this a bit, is the amount of preparation time. How often do you show up at a meeting when others are not prepared, or you're not as prepared as you would like to be for a meeting? One way to run and move through effective meetings is the preparation time. So we talk about some ways in which this can happen and give you some tools that may facilitate others in coming to the meeting and being prepared so that we can get to that 90-minute window or move swiftly through meetings. We talk about building a bigger agenda. There are many theories around the structure and organization of an agenda. We have some ideas as well to share with you around that and how the agenda itself should be so arranged to, again, lead to an effective process of information and effective use of everyone's time in the room. But I would say that in most cases, we don't take this opportunity. So one of the things we hope when you leave a retreat, a Vital Teams retreat, is that you will have an opportunity to think about and restructure your agendas in ways in which they might be more helpful to meeting the commitments and opportunities you have in your particular setting. Two of the ways that we talk about that is we do a complete review of consent agendas. And perhaps some of you have heard of consent agendas. This is a relatively new concept, and maybe not a new concept as much as a concept that more people are beginning to use and understand the use of this. Consent agendas or consent calendars have been a part of Robert's Rules of Order for a very long time, but it's not used as much and as efficiently as some might think. So that's an area that we hope to point congregations to vestries and teams, is towards the use of consent agendas. Again, around this whole notion of how do we structure our agendas, we talk about how do we address unfinished business and how do we keep items in front of us, knowing that we can't solve all of the world's problems in one night, and we certainly can't solve all of our faith community or church problems in one night. But that does not mean the problems don't go away. How do we keep that information in front of us and deal with the priorities and focus on results in each meeting? Spend a considerable amount of time talking about the pros and cons of consensus decision-making versus majority decision-making, and some of the ways in which this might happen. So we take you through the pros and the cons and hopefully help you understand when consensus decision-making is appropriate and a good idea, and when majority decision-making is needed. But we believe for strong teams to work together, going back to that original notion of clergy and laity working together for this common benefit and having shared responsibility and authority, we believe one of the big tools towards that is certainly this notion of consensus decision-making. And here's some of the pros and cons that we would discuss around majority rule versus consensus decision making. I'm going to take a moment and check my chat box to see if anybody is chiming in or has any questions. If there are any questions, please feel free to add those to the chat box. Okay, I know Brendan is working with Debbie, so Debbie, thank you so much. Brendan will hopefully work through your problem there and get you going. The third element, which we believe is an essential ingredient to an effective team, is focusing on results. Again, as part of our time together, should we were to do a retreat or a workshop together, we would spend some time talking and discussing these three areas. Identifying, how does your vestry identify annual goals? And what might those goals look like? But even after identifying the goals, it's important to understand, how do we check in? How do we monitor our process? How do we work towards that? And how do your vestry or your leadership team take an opportunity to reflect on how the team is doing? This is another important area. How is the team doing? That goes back to how do we focus on results, but also continuing to work on and build strong teams. Two of the areas that we focus on here is goal setting, helping vestries and leadership team work through goals and how to set goals and work through those. And the other area is establishing feedback loops, both at the individual level and the group level. Some of you may also already be familiar with what SMART goals are. Again, during our retreat time together, we would hope to end our retreat time with your vestry or leadership team identifying 2 to 3 priority SMART goals. We take some time during our retreat time together to work through that and to identify those and help you articulate those goals. We look at how those goals might be aligned with your vision and mission. And we spend some time talking about really what's the difference between vision and mission and how do we understand that? How do we monitor our progress? And how do we continue to keep track and keep these goals in front of us? And how we're working through them and what the milestones is. One of the areas I talk about as a way of setting goals is that old method that I learned many years ago in industry called management by objective. We've renamed this now to ministry by objective. And it is an effective way in which you might look at establishing and working through your goals. This is the framework that we work through for SMART goals, being specific, measurable. Who are they assigned to? Are the goals realistic and time specific? So again, during our time together, we would take you through these 5 elements, identify 2 or 3 goals that would be important and priority in your particular context, and walk you through setting these SMART goals. This is another tool that we introduced, and it's called music. And music is a good way of filtering and evaluating your goals. You know, once we establish our goals, we want to take a few steps back and then think about how these goals fit the vision and mission of our faith community. How do they identify us as unique? Are they sustainable over a long period of time? How do these goals speak to our identity? And the big question always is capacity. Do we have the resources, the people, the physical plant, the tools to accomplish the goals which we identify as being priority for us? And sometimes through going through this process, we can eliminate goals or find out the goals that we might think are important or even a priority may not be where we should be focusing our attention. This is the ministry by objective. This is probably one of the simplest methods to use in terms of working towards goals. And we spent some time on that. And this is what I use to a great extent here in my congregation, the ministry by objective or management by objective, which is the process that we will take you through as an additional tool to use through working through your organization. The MBOs are similar to SMART goals in that they list 5 areas They talk about prioritizing objectives. Of course, as we understand, goals must be measurable, or objectives must be measurable. Are they realistic? You see that last one that talks about compatibility. Are they compatible to some of the things I just previously mentioned? Is one goal compatible with the next goal? Do we see a stream or a connection that thread through a series of goals? And how do we understand those? And we talk about that in each individual context. We advocate for and believe that this is where the majority of our meeting time should be focused, is on goals. Looking at our goals, making sure that we are working towards our norms that we have previously established, and focusing on those areas. How are we working together, and what are we working towards? Those are two main components of what we should be looking at every meeting when we gather. And identifying these goals at our meetings. Moving away from many of the perfunctory and routine activities of the vestry into an area of really focusing on the results. Spending our 90 minutes, if you will, on what matters, what's important. This is a huge area, both in terms of focusing on results, but also in terms of strengthening the team. And let me just spend a couple minutes to talk about this. It's important that all members of the team work together to establish regular and informal feedback loops. Now, this is something my boss does very well. About every 6 weeks or so, all members of my boss team, he contacts and sets up a time, usually an hour, to have a conversation, not about the work we're doing together, but about how are we doing? How is Ron Bird doing? How's Ron Bird's family doing? How are the other parts of Ron Bird's life? And my boss actually gets an opportunity to share that with me. You can see how that might be helpful to building a strong relationship, but also in terms of how we're working together and how we're focusing on the things that are before us. You know, my colleague Brendan tonight is, while he's been gracious to be with us tonight and help support this webinar, but I know that Brendan is not feeling very well, which is why he's not on the screen. But Brendan is not feeling very well. But these type of things, we want to know about those who we share common space with, common goals with, how they're doing, how their wives doing, how their family doing, how their partners doing, you know, how are things going? This is so important, and I'm always inspired and invigorated after I complete a call with my boss when I've had an opportunity to share with him about things that are going on in my parish, in my family, in my personal life, my golf scores, if you will. So that's an important level, and it's important that not only the chair, typically the rector, and we talk about that too in our time together, around why the rector should not always be the chair, or the priest in charge should not always be the chair of a vestry. But all of the members need to engage in this way. I'm reminded of that phrase, how are you doing? What's going on in your life? So at the individual level, we want to talk about that. The other level is at the group level. How are we doing together as a team? This is an opportunity for team members to share with each other how they think things are going. Things are going well. Meetings are too long. Joe Smith, you know, is taking up too much of the meeting time. How do we get the meeting to be focused? It's an opportunity for us to talk about that. And one of the ways in doing this at the group level is always to remind ourselves and to point back to the group norms that we established very early on. And that's why establishing group norms and agreeing to them is so very important. Let me also say that while we talk about group norms, we also get into a conversation during our time together around establishing vestry covenants. And that's a whole nother conversation, but the two hold hands together. And both are important towards, again, establishing strong relationship, but also keeping us on task and focus on the results that are in front of us and the opportunities. These are some suggested questions you may want to take a look at these. But these are some suggested questions that, quite frankly, as I said, my boss used in our regular 6-week discussion. He will ask, Ron, how do you feel we're doing as a team? How do you think we're meeting our norms? And this is an opportunity for people to speak up, and an opportunity particularly for some of the introverts out there to kind of speak about how they think things are going. What's going really well? What hasn't? I was recently in the Diocese of Minnesota working with them, and one of the ways in which they debrief is they talk about what should we do again and what do we need to look at. So that's another way to answer the same question. What do we do over and what would you change? To keep it in more in an appreciative format. So these are a couple ways that we talk about and spend some time on focusing on results. During our time together in a retreat or a retreat opportunity or workshop, and particularly in retreats, we have an opportunity to go through some interactive exercises so that the team really gets to know each other, but more importantly, the team also has an opportunity to experience some of these tools, which we will share with you over the day and a half together. This is another such exercise. It's an interactive exercise, and I just put it here for an example. And it's also taking you through a model of how to evaluate your goals in the work that you're doing together. And this is more of a statistical method. And we use this quite often among our team. And the last part of what we try to introduce the teams to is identifying next steps. After we spent a day and a half together, which really amounts to a little over 8 hours worth of training, actual training, in addition to some of the other elements of the program, we want to spend some time talking about how do we move forward. We had a good time together from Friday evening and on Saturday all day, and we've learned some new tools. We talked about a number of areas which we want to focus on in our congregation, on our vestry or in our leadership team. How do we move forward? So the next area we spend some time on before all of us going our separate ways is spend some time talking about what do we do over the next 6 months. It is our hope after a full weekend retreat with you, with a team, a vestry or a leadership team, that they will identify a few areas that they want to focus in on. We're going to hit you with a lot of information, a lot of opportunities to look at, a number of resources to think about. But again, we can't do it all at one time, but we can focus on a couple areas. So really my hope is always when I meet with a group is at the end of the time together that they will commit to do, address a couple opportunities in each of these 3 areas: strong relationships, clear processes, and results. And we always close, obviously, perhaps with additional resources. I didn't spend much time talking about that at the beginning, but I did. One of the areas that I did want to introduce to you is ECF has a number of wonderful resources that are available to you. This includes the Vestry Resource Guide. This includes ECF Vital Practices. This includes a number of webinars, such as this one that we present. But we have a number of resources available, and we take some time to introduce that to you at the end of our time together. So even though we've spent 8 or 10 hours together, you are not left alone. We leave you with a number of resources that we feel might be helpful for you in continuing your work forward. That's where I am now. I guess I would like to just take a moment and see if there are any questions out there or any comments. Kathy has put a question up. Will you be emailing out your presentation? The presentation, Kathy, will be available at ECF website. this presentation is being recorded as we speak, and you will be able to see the presentation at the Episcopal Church website for more information. Please keep in mind that what I presented to you tonight is a brief overview and a outline of what the curriculum might be. For some of you that may have joined late, let me just say again, what I've reviewed tonight covers a day and a half worth of curriculum. What we generally do is we meet with a group on Friday evening at around 6 p.m. in the evening. We work until about 9 p.m. And then we gather again on Saturday morning and work together from 9 a.m. in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And so what my hope was tonight is just to give you a brief overview of what a weekend might look like, or an opportunity to learn more about Vital Teams. And we would hope that if you find this of particular interest for your particular context, please contact us at our New York office. Brendan Hunter is the program director, and he will be more than happy to put you in touch with myself or those who might be able to help you in terms of organizing a visit by ECL. Brendan just indicated that he will email we'll send an email to everyone who registered with the link to download the slides. Very good. Other thoughts or questions? Well then, with that, I want to thank you all for participating tonight. Thank you for your time. And again, if there's anything further you would like to learn about Vital Teams, please contact us through ECF. As I say, we do present these trainings around the country and workshop and in a full retreat effort. Our desire is to help our church, which you are all a part of, move in and move from what we call a clergy-centered model to more collaborative teams, and how do we strengthen those teams. And what I presented to you tonight is a part of that whole notion and concept to help you do that. So please feel free to contact us if you would like to learn more. With that, I'm going to bid you all a good night, and thank you very much again for joining us. Good night.